All right, welcome to Mississippi State Live here on the Voice of College Football. Andrew Miller and Christian Ballard here on a Monday evening. We'll talk about Mississippi State in the transfer portal. Going to look at the biggest needs for the Bulldogs in the portal tonight. Also going to talk about the wide receiver coach search, which fans were hoping there'd be resolution on that over the weekend. They did not get the resolution on that. So I'm going to talk about that situation a little bit here just in a sec. For those of you tuning in, if you could leave us a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you are not already, turn that notification bell on so you do know when we do go live. And if you could share the stream, share the channel, all that great stuff, we would greatly appreciate it. Christian, how's it going?
It's going great, Andrew. Good to be back here on a Monday. And, same stuff, different week. But, when you're in this business, it's like you get a little bit different news each week. And obviously, it's kind of downtime for state a little bit. But, yeah, just excited to see what's going on with the portal. Also, I believe you and I were talking, and I had missed this the other day with all the bowl selections. We did get a bowl bid, if I'm not mistaken, in Wake Forest, right?
Yeah, we talked about the Mayo Bowl. I think we talked about that last week. So, or at least I talked about it on last Monday. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I'm excited to see that. We'll definitely have to do something coming up. I know the holidays kind of get crazy, but hopefully we stay in touch with that one.
Yeah, I guess I didn't even think about the Christmas is a Thursday. And then Christmas Eve, I have stuff going on. Plus, who wants to watch a stream of people talking about this on Christmas Eve? So we'll have to figure out our Christmas schedule. Also, I'm going to be watching the Hawaii Bowl. Like, I have Christmas Eve, but then, the Hawaii Bowl, which is basically church. Those two things, Christmas Eve. So I'm not going to be on here talking. So, yeah, holiday schedule. We'll get that figured out. How we're going to do it for next week. Most likely we just do a Monday show and just leave it at that. But we'll figure out for sure what that'll look like. Let's talk about the wide receiver coaching search, because Mississippi State obviously made the move to move on from Chad Bumphus. Controversial and a surprising move, not one that anyone was anticipating was going to happen. And then when it did happen, everyone was pretty thoroughly ticked off that was a decision Jeff Lebby chose to make. When you're talking about a beloved former alum, a guy who was an all-time great at Mississippi State, one of the greatest receivers to ever wear the maroon and white, a guy who bleeds MSU through and through, a guy that it was his dream to be able to come back and coach here. And look, through his time on campus as a coach, the wide receiver position was pretty consistently solid and was the best group State kind of had offensively, if not for the entire team throughout his tenure. So you felt like he was doing a good enough job, and you want to have a guy like that on your staff, a guy who's got the ties to Mississippi State like that, for all the impact they can have when it comes to recruiting, when it comes to connecting to players on the roster. You would hope to have guys like Chad Bumphus on staff. Obviously, Jeff Lebby felt that something was lacking, and they chose to make a move. And it felt as though you were centering in or zeroing in on a clear target to land and come in and replace Chad Bumphus. And that was LaDamian Washington at Kentucky. Guy who played at Missouri, was a part of the 2013 SEC East champion team, or I believe he was the leading receiver on that team in yards, just ahead of Dorial Green Beckham. Had a short stint in the NFL, kind of bouncing around practice squads, never really made it in pro football, but gets into coaching. And he had 1 year of overlap with Jeff Lebby when in 2022, when he was the interim receivers coach at Oklahoma. He was like an analyst on that staff. And then the leading receiver coach, Cale Gundy, resigned over some controversy there. It was kind of an unfair controversy to him, but Gundy stepped down, and Washington stepped in as the interim, did a good job that year. OU wanted to keep him on staff, but also wanted to get someone who's a little bit more proven as a full-time guy. He goes to South Florida, though, spends 2 seasons there with Alex Golesh, so kind of staying within the veer and shoot system. First just the receivers coach, and then became the receivers coach and passing game coordinator in 2024. And then this past year gets an opportunity to go to the SEC and is the wide receivers coach with Kentucky. And the people around Lexington thought very highly of him. They felt that the younger receivers on the roster did a good job developing over the course of the season. And by the end of the year, they had a couple guys, again, who were younger players that started to show out a little bit. They liked what he was doing on the recruiting trail. He brought in a recruiting class that had a couple 4-star receiver signees, had several other guys that were higher 3-stars that had multiple power conference and SEC offers. So felt like he was doing a good job there. And there were a lot of people around Kentucky that were hoping they would hold on to him. But new coach Will Stein chooses to go and get a guy that from UTSA that he had more familiarity with. Washington looking for another opportunity. And when his name came up for State quite a bit, obviously, not a guy that a lot of fans knew. I'll be the first to admit I did not really know him. I had seen his name just because when you learned that Bumpus was being moved on from, I went and looked, okay, well, who are the receivers Lebby's worked with? And I'd seen Washington, but I didn't really dive into his resume, background, any of that stuff. But once you start to look into it, you realize, okay, that this guy could be a promising option, and it made a lot of sense because he had worked with Lebby before. He had been in the system extensively from his time at South Florida. So he's very familiar with what you're doing within this offense. Had the overlap with Bush Hamden, who's coming over obviously as an offensive assistant, who was Kentucky's OC last year. So a guy that there were a lot of ties there that came together really well. And I think he checked a lot of boxes. And is it a hire that would have blown the world away? No. He's still someone who's very much an up-and-comer, has not fully proven whether or not this is an established guy who's going to be a great receivers coach for years to come. But someone that there was a lot of buzz around and someone that other SEC programs were interested in. So you felt like State was in position to make that move. It felt like it'd be a good hire. Unfortunately for Mississippi State, it doesn't happen, and he ends up taking that job at Ole Miss. And it was a bit of a frustrating thing to see happen because, again, it felt like there were so many things that were tying him to Mississippi State that it checked a lot of boxes. And then to see him go to Ole Miss and want to go take that job with Pete Golding in his first year as a head coach, who has not proven anything there to this point as a head coach. He's obviously very proven as a defensive coordinator, proven as a recruiter, all those things. But Pete Golding as a head coach, you don't know what that program is going to be like at Ole Miss. They're bringing in a new OC and John David Baker, who I think is a fantastic hire and is going to continue a lot of what Ole Miss was doing on offense. But still, it's a brand new situation at Oxford. What does that look like moving forward? And he felt that was a better situation than coming to Mississippi State. And that stings a little bit. And it doesn't look great. It certainly never looks good to lose to a rival in the hiring process, but it also hurts because of the idea, this situation, you made a controversial move, right? Moving on from Chad Bumpus. And look, if you want to tell me that you think State could have upgraded, like there is a case to be made that if you think Chad Bumpus was not maximizing Mississippi State's wide receivers room, I'm willing to hear that case, and I may even go as far to acknowledge that it's potentially accurate. Because if you want to start diving into specifics with, what are the true big recruiting wins? Who are the guys that have been developed? Because I think that is something that is a real criticism at this point, is you've not seen guys on the roster turn into true playmakers for Mississippi State, be even contributors for Mississippi State at the receiver position. And the guys who have had success are those Bumpus guys or Lebby guys, both in terms of the ties and then also just the fact that Lebby's system is going to lend to a lot of success for wide receivers. So you can make those cases that Bumpus was not doing the absolute best job. And I'm willing to hear that. But if you're going to replace him, knowing that the receiver position has been pretty good for Mississippi State, it's not something that was going to make or break Mississippi State having success offensively. And you're talking about it's a guy who is a beloved alum, is a Bulldog, and is going to go to war for your program. If you're going to move on from that guy, you better feel confident you're getting a really, really good option in, and ideally getting your top target in. That we're making this move because we have a target in mind, and you weren't able to do it. And that's one of those things when people start talking about having their doubts with Jeff Lebby and what he's able to ultimately do for Mississippi State, like it raises some eyebrows. And look, a lot of people have said, why are we getting upset over a guy that we didn't know who he was till 2 days ago? I think a lot of it is the situation, right? Because you moved on from Chad and because it's just not a good look to ultimately whiff. Like State wanted this guy, and not only did they not get him, he's going to Ole Miss. of all places. It's not a great look. And knowing that when you moved on from a guy that you didn't feel like you had to move on from, it's just going to create more doubt for people. Now, look, I've had some people tell me that wide receiver coach is not going to make or break Mississippi State, and Levy's going to get good receiver play regardless. I don't disagree with those things. I don't think wide receiver is going to be the difference in Mississippi State having success next season or not, but it definitely feels like unless you go out and really land someone that everyone can be confident is going to come in and be an outstanding receivers coach, it's just going to be a knock against Levy to this point. And look, to be fair, Washington is still very much an up-and-comer. He is not a surefire, can't-miss guy. But I think there was enough on his resume that you could look at and see where people were excited about him. And again, did not make it happen. It's just not a great look for Levy. And it does create more pressure that, like, you really need to find a good option to come in here because, again, do I think State's receivers are going to suck next year? No. I think as long as they make a reasonably decent hire, they'll probably be fine at the wide receiver position. It's not going to make or break Mississippi State being successful a season from now, or sorry, next season. But it's just the idea of the perception of it all. And the perception's not great.
Yeah, I think that with this wide receiver position, it's like, or at least the coaching position, you want to have a guy that, well, I'll say this. I don't care if a guy has ties to the program or not. I think it's great if he does, but that can't be the only thing you look for as far as, oh, this guy grew up a Mississippi State fan, or he's an alum, he's a player, and he was this or that. There is a fine line between being a great player and then being able to coach a team or coach a position. So, and a lot of times you can find a guy out there, um, that ends up with, um, the skill set for both. I think so. To lose this guy too, by the way, to they lost him to Ole Miss. I think that's a big blow to it. Overall, you never want to lose a um, uh, you don't want to lose someone that's a big piece of your program and your history to a rival. Um, and how do I say Ladamian Washington? Ladamian, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, it stings, and it's probably going to sting for a little bit, but for Mississippi State, they just got to keep their head up and keep the main thing the main thing, and they will get somebody in there, and hopefully it's the right move that you look at and say, this is an upgrade from 2025 to 2026, and you hope that the receiver room, really every position, but obviously we're talking receivers here, you hope that that really steps up.
So, I don't disagree with the idea of it doesn't have to be someone that has ties to State. And that's where, you make the decision to move on from Bumpus. And yes, like, the biggest selling point with him is that he is a Bulldog. And I totally
Mhm.
I agree that cannot be the only thing. I said as much when the move happened that does get overblown to an extent. And it probably sounds like I'm overblowing it to be completely honest. But what I said when you moved on from him was like, look, if he wasn't doing the job well, then you can't. It doesn't matter that he's a Bulldog. You would have to move on. But I felt like Chad Bumpus was doing the job pretty well. Again, I understand if you want to make a point that State could be doing better. I'm willing to hear that. But I also don't think Chad Bumpus was a reason Mississippi State was struggling, which is where he gets into the idea of if you're going to make the move, you better nail the hire. And
Right.
I think LaDamia Washington would have been pretty close to nailing the hire, and you just don't make it happen. And that's kind of where this is the risk in all this. Because, why did this happen? Why was LaDamia Washington willing to go to Pete Golding in year one rather than take the job at Mississippi State? And I think a big part of it is there's real concern that like Jeff Lebby's not going to be the coach here next year. Like after next season, rather. After next season. You know, whether people want to admit it or not, and I know from being on the message boards, there's a lot of people that get very upset if you suggest Jeff Lebby is on a hot seat. The reality is, if Jeff Lebby does not win next year, Jeff Lebby's not going to be Mississippi State's head coach in 2027. Like, he needs to have a winning season next year. You know, maybe 6-6 is enough. 7-5 would definitely be enough. But Jeff Lebby has to have a good season next year. And if he doesn't have that, if it's 5-7 or worse, or maybe even at 6-6, you are doing a coaching change. And when you are an assistant coach, your job security is largely tied to the job security of the head coach. And I understand why some would not want to say, I'm going to go walk into that situation. That it happened with defensive coordinator. Like Brent Pry, DJ Durkin, these names that were heavily connected to Mississippi State, who ultimately decided to stay at the programs that, you know, in one case you were fired as a head coach, in the other case you thought you were going to get the head coaching job and didn't get it. They were willing to stay there because they felt like, you know what, our family's happy here. We got the money, and I'd rather not make a move right now. And you can leave it at that. But I think there's also the reality that those guys looked at it and said, I don't know if Jeff Lebby's going to be coaching past this next year at Mississippi State. So why do I want to go there? Now, you go out and get a proven guy in Zach Arnett, but I think Zach Arnett's a very unique situation in that his chances of landing a job better than Mississippi State were slim to none. Like, Mississippi State was as good as Zach Arnett was going to be able to do. If he wanted to be a defensive coordinator in 2026, Mississippi State was as good as Zach Arnett was going to be able to do. It worked out fine for State because you get a guy who's a proven DC who has done the job in Starkville and done it well. But I think if a guy like Zach Arnett doesn't exist, you know, there was all this talk of Jeff Lebby has to go out and get a proven DC to replace Coleman Hutzler. I don't think Jeff Lebby would have gotten a proven DC. I think it would have been an up-and-comer, which is not the end of the world because those guys can work out. But I think the expectation of Lebby's got to go out and get a big name, I don't think those guys would have been coming. So, again, you lucked into it with Arnett. So in the case of making a position coach hire, I look at it and I just don't think, like, I don't know that State's going to be able to go out and attract a lot of guys who have several options. I know people brought up the names like Derek Nix and Jacob Peeler. Nix, obviously, who was a wide receivers coach at Ole Miss in this system, currently was the running backs coach at Auburn and a co-OC there. He'd been a running backs coach at Ole Miss for a long time. You know, legendary recruiter within the state of Mississippi, like a guy who's just done a great job. A legendary is too strong of a word, but a really well-respected recruiter within the state of Mississippi. State's not going to be able to get him because he's going to have other opportunities. Jacob Peeler, like, why would he leave Missouri right now to go to Mississippi State? Even though he's a Mississippi guy, a Mississippi State alum, it doesn't make a lot of sense to him for him to leave the job that he's got because it's just the timing doesn't seem perfectly aligned because you have the questions about Lebby. And I know a lot of people would say, some coaches do bounce around as much as they want and go anywhere. But if some coaches do move from job to job, but I think if you're willing to do that, it's because you're looking for upward trajectory. It's because you're confident that I'm either parlaying this into another job. Like, it's like, I know I've got stability. And if I'm going to move around, it's because I'm moving upward. Well, if you go to this job and everybody gets fired, are you moving upward? It's tough to do. Like, and again, people want coaches who are confident they're going to win, but I think you also have to make a decision that's going to be the best for you. So now, in terms of Washington picking Pete Golding at Ole Miss, obviously that's interesting because Golding it's year one, and if things go poorly there, yeah, he could be in trouble. I don't think it's Zach Arnett all over again. I don't think they're going to fall off a cliff because I think Golding has made a few decisions that at least are going to better suit them than Arnett made for State. But, there are questions about it. And it's unfortunate that right now that would be viewed as a more stable situation to walk into. I know I'm going all in on this, but I'm just trying, like, I'm walking through, like, State misses out on their top option, and I feel like you made a move you didn't have to make, and now I wonder if you're actually going to be able to upgrade at that spot, which clearly the move was made because you felt you could upgrade. But I don't know if you're actually going to be able to. In terms of potential targets at this point, I mean, apparently Levy wants someone with ties to the system. I think you're going to have a hard time finding guys with ties to the system that are really true up and comers. Like guys who are established at other jobs, guys who are proven great coaches. I don't think you're going to get those guys that are tied to this offense. Now, I think you're going to be looking at up and coming coaches. One name that stood out to me, Cody Cook from Old Dominion. He kind of GA'd at Tennessee under Heupel as an assistant receiver guy. Got the receivers coach job at Old Dominion, who runs this offense. Had young receivers perform really well when those guys were not doing any, like new faces stepping in. So he's done a great job in 2 seasons there within this offense. Also has a couple of receivers that I think Mississippi State should potentially go after. David Whitlow at Kennesaw State. He was a GA under Kiffin at Ole Miss. Also had 3 years at Auburn. Was the wide receivers coach at West Georgia 2 seasons ago. And then this year stepped in at Kennesaw State, who started running this offense. They hired their OC from Tennessee. And had 2 guys that just exploded in production, which obviously this system kind of does it, but as a coach, that helps out. Darrell Roberts from East Carolina, they were running this offense. He's done a pretty nice job reloading their receiver room. A name that's a more established guy that's connected to the system, Darrell Wyatt at Boston College. This guy's been coaching for a long, long time. Had a lot of stops over the years. He was at Southern Miss in 08 and 09 as a receivers coach, but Oklahoma 1 year, really multiple years at Oklahoma, Arizona, Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma State as an analyst, Houston, Arkansas State, currently at Boston College where he's in his 4th year, but he also spent 3 seasons at UCF with Josh Heupel, which means he also worked with Jeff Lebby during that time. So guy's been doing it for a really long time at that role and has been within this system. I mean, maybe all those guys are realistic. I don't know how attractive candidates any of them are. But if you're going to get a guy tied with the offense, that's about as good as you're going to be able to do. Dino Babers is out there, who was, in this system back at Baylor, but he doesn't coach currently. That's a former head coach of Syracuse, but the guy's 64 years old. I kind of doubt that he's looking to come be a receivers coach at this point. Outside of the system, I saw people on social media calling for Cale Gundy. As I mentioned earlier, LaDainian Washington got the wide receivers coach job at Oklahoma on an interim basis because Cale Gundy had to resign. Which, again, it was a resignation that everybody was pretty ticked off over. Felt like it wasn't fair to him. Look, Gundy was an awesome receivers coach at Oklahoma. He is an OU lifer. Like, that was a program he was at for years and years and years. All of his ties are to that program. He's been out of coaching since that happened. I don't think he makes a lot of sense to come to Mississippi State in that type of a role. It's been a few years at the same time. All of his ties are really to one program. I will say some people have brought up Billy Gonzalez at Florida, and that's a guy that, of course, was at Mississippi State and did a really good job coaching up State's wideouts during his time there from 2013 through 2017. One heck of a good recruiter. No ties to this system, but I think he'd be a good option if you're looking to just get someone who has done the job well and done it successfully. He's landed a lot of talented receivers over the years. So, I think that'd be someone worth looking into. If you're not going to get held up on getting somebody in this system, like, I feel like that's about as good of a hire as you could possibly make since he wasn't retained at Florida. But we'll see on that. Moving on here, I'm just going to hit real quick. State's had a few players hit the transfer portal since we last talked. Really only one name that truly stands out. The ones we'll go through quick. Joseph Head at defensive end. Played a lot over the last 2 years. In fact, as a true freshman, actually had to play some significant snaps for State, but just not a guy who was a heavy part of the rotation this season. Going to move on. Fat Forrest at linebacker. I don't really even know how much he played this season, but didn't really make much of an impact. Obviously, kind of the story there is that he's really close friends with Tyler Lockhart, from being high school teammates together. So what does that look like? Could that impact Lockhart one way or another? I kind of doubt it. I think Fat's just sort of going to go look for another opportunity elsewhere. Max Reese at tight end, transfer in from Eastern Michigan, caught 2 passes this year for 1 yard. Just really was not a factor for Mississippi State. Wide receiver Frizzell Shepard. That was an interesting one for State because that's a guy it was a weird situation that he was committed to Mississippi State for a long time, ultimately didn't sign with the program. I don't know if they had a spot for him, what the deal was. Looked like he was going to go to UTSA, but then ends up that summer coming to Mississippi State and, redshirted this year, but I guess looking for an opportunity elsewhere now. The one name that stands out, Jim Lewis, who, of course, was a 4-star signee for State 2 seasons ago at offensive line. Someone that, man, when Mississippi State landed him, you thought we're talking about a big-time O-lineman stepping in here and a guy who, if he develops and can hit his athletic ceiling, we're talking about a really strong offensive tackle for Mississippi State, a guy who could be a really multi-year starter, have a lot of success, and just never quite hit the potential. Obviously, redshirted his first year. This season got thrust into a starting role kind of early on because of the injuries to Blake Steen and then ultimately Albert Reese. Played in 7 games, made 4 starts. It just wasn't good enough, if we're being completely honest. He was not ready for that spot. And when he was in the game, a lot of times he was a bit of a liability, which that's not all on him. Javen James, obviously, also in kind of the same spot, struggled as well. But clearly was not fully ready for that role just yet. Look, a guy with high athletic upside, a guy that if it clicks, it would be great. And for that reason, would you prefer to still have him on the roster going forward? Sure, you'd like to have the guy at State in case it all comes together. But at the same time, it's hard to sweat it too much when what we saw so far just wasn't quite enough from him. So, we'll see where he lands, how it happens for him. But it wasn't working out to what we'd seen so far. Moving on to guys that Mississippi State could be going after. Obviously, State does not have any names in the portal to this point because the portal doesn't open until January 2nd, and we're not going to know which guys MSU is able to land until that point. I guess technically, we're already seeing for all these quarterbacks in the portal, like potential landing spots. Like landing spots have been announced for Sam Levitt, Dylan Raiola, DJ Lagway. We're already hearing all that. So I guess in theory, State could come up for some potential targets, but not going to hear that until the portal opens. What are the biggest needs for State, though, out of the portal? That's the things that we really want to get into here. And I know some of them are obvious, but we're still going to run into what State needs to target, why they need to target. So, Christian, I'll turn it over to you. What's the number one need in your mind for Mississippi State out of the transfer portal, position-wise?
I think recently I feel like under Levy, using the portal, recruiting, building in the trenches has been great. I think building this team overall has been great. The first thing that comes to mind, 2 positions come to mind, and I want your take on both of them, obviously, but
let's go one at a time.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think the first one would be O-line, just straight up, like not necessarily like. I mean, maybe you need a little bit more at guard than you do tackle, but either way, I mean, I feel like we need to build the offensive line depth. I think we have guys there, but I feel like I don't know, man. I mean, do you have enough for next season? Like coming into 2026? No. I mean, I think that's got to be the key focus is building around this offense and getting protection for whoever plays quarterback. And then I think that would probably be something I want to look into a little bit too is, could you go after a quarterback? What's next for Blake Shapen? Your thoughts?
Well, Shapen's done.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're probably going to go after a quarterback because they got to have somebody else on the roster. But, I mean, it's Kamario Taylor's team next year. And then I don't think Luke Kromenhoek's – I mean, we'll see. If Luke Kromenhoek sticks around, hey, great, good for him. But ultimately, like playing-wise, it's not going to be him. They're going to have to get somebody from a depth standpoint. No, but talking about offensive line, that was my number 2. So, I mean, we can go ahead and talk about it. I don't necessarily agree on guard over tackle. I mean, I think across the board they got to get better, but at the tackle spot, man, Albert Reese was your best offensive lineman. His career's done. So your best lineman who is a tackle is out. Blake Steen will be back next year from injury. But are we positive he's going to be a guy that can step in and really lead you the rest of the way? We don't know. Javen James will be able to come back. He started games for you this year. Was not great for you this year. Could he, with another year of development, what does that look like? We'll see. But obviously you're losing Jimothy Lewis. So of your top 4 tackles, 2 are gone. Luke Work will still be on the roster, assuming he doesn't transfer out. And I hope he doesn't, because, I mean, he's played a lot for State over the last couple of years. But he really is more of a guard than he is a tackle. I mean, running through the roster real quick, just in terms of the guys State has at offensive line coming back that are potential tackles. Jakeem Shumpert Perkins, maybe. Spencer Dowland is still young. Saquon Miles, maybe. Yeah, they don't have a lot. They've got to go out and find tackles, because I don't think they got anybody in the signing class this year who is going to step in as a freshman and contribute. And I know they got a JUCO signee as well. I kind of doubt that he's going to be able to do much there. We've Mario Nash hit the portal, improving talent. I wonder if the ship has sailed on him, because I know it was a whole thing with his recruitment, whether or not that was going to be able to happen. Also bringing up, we need to go look at guys from Miami of Ohio, because Cam Perry at receiver, Drew Terrell at offensive tackle, both solid options. Perry I'm aware of, because I started looking at potential guys for State to go after a receiver. Terrell, I do know Miami of Ohio.
That was going to be one of my next positions.
We can get to that in a sec.
Oh, yeah.
I want to finish offensive line.
Okay.
Miami pretty consistently has good offensive linemen, so I mean, I'd definitely be interested. They have good players in general. Why am I blanking on the coach's name? Who's really freaking good there? I hate that. Chuck Martin. Chuck Martin at Miami of Ohio. Like, he's just a consistently good football coach. Very much a Midwest guy, but if some Big Ten program is looking for a coach to step in and just win football games, go hire Chuck Martin from Miami. Teams won't do it because they look at the overall record and like, oh, I can't hire that, because fan bases and boosters are stupid and don't recognize like success coaching in the MAC, regardless. Anyway, State's gonna have to get offensive line hard, and they got to get guys who are proven starters, which is tough to do, man, because a lot of those guys don't hit the portal. State has got to be one of the top spenders at offensive line, and it's not a question. You have to get guys who can step in and be major contributors up front. I mean, in terms of guys you're going to have back, like Zach Owens can come back. Okay, cool. I believe with Cannon Boone, they're going to be looking for another year of eligibility on him. I think that was a thing. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but if you could get him back as another year at center, that'd be cool. Otherwise, Colby Keenum there stepping in, but I don't remember how much he played for State this season. You'd imagine Luke Work takes over for Jacoby Jackson at one of the guard spots. You could be kind of set along the offensive interior. Now, if you can find guys to step in and upgrade, awesome. But tackle is a spot you've got to go get and upgrade for sure. State's tackles were such a train wreck this season. Handling pass rush, you got to be able to do a better job of that. So that's definitely a high priority. I had it at number 2 because the only reason I didn't have it as number 1 is because I do think offensively with Levy, there's sort of a high floor that you're not going to be god-awful. And I think with Camario in at quarterback, you can kind of figure a few more things out because of what he does for the run game, and then obviously avoiding sacks in the pass game. My number 1, I mean, defensive line is the top for me. And it's the trenches. And look, you can argue O-line, D-line, either way. State has got to get better along the defensive line. They were better this year than they were a season ago. They had guys who I think at least were solid options. They were not terrible up front. Just looking through some of the guys that were contributors this year, Jere Bledsoe showed flashes. Calvin Dinkins showed you more than he has to this point in his career, showed a lot of flashes to get you kind of excited about what he potentially could turn into. I think, a guy like DJ Reed, showed you some flashes and some potential. Trevion Williams, I think, had a better season than he's had to much of this point in his career. You still did not get anything at defensive end. You didn't have a true dominant interior defensive lineman to this point. And of the guys returning, could one of them turn into that? Sure, but you haven't shown it yet. Will Whitson, obviously, is the big question. State feels pretty good about getting him back for another year. And I do think, based on what we saw from Whitson in 1.5 games, you feel like State would have been better up front if you had him, for sure. We're also basing it off of 1.5 games with not playing an SEC team. Like, what is Will Whitson – like, is Will Whitson is that dominant once you get into SEC play? Who knows? We don't know. You've got to bring – like, they probably need 4 or 5 defensive linemen, honestly. Like, you need a couple edge guys. You need a couple interior guys for sure. I know linebackers are part of the equation because you got to find the stand-up edge rushers for the strong side position in Zach Arnett's defense, or the Sam position, rather. But who can play that stand-up edge type role because you don't feel great about the guys you got on the roster right now. But they got to get bigger, stronger up front on the defensive line. You just cannot get pushed around the way they have over the past 2 years. You can't get away with so few little bit of pass rush. If you do not improve the defense, like I think Zach Arnett's a better defensive coordinator than Hutzler. Obviously, that's not a debate. I think you got some good options at linebacker. I like that room. I think secondary, you could have a few intriguing pieces if you get Kelly Jones back, and if you can develop a couple guys, add some pieces in. But if the defensive line does not greatly improve, it's really not going to matter. They got to get better up front.
I think so. I think I'll have to look a little bit deeper, but I did see a couple of key names. You mentioned getting guys in the trenches, especially along the defensive line. There's a couple different guys out there. One that stood out to me, though, although I think he had some issues at Auburn. I don't remember why he got suspended, but at some point this year he got suspended a little bit. There's a guy named Antonio Coleman. They have him listed as an edge defender, which I guess is probably what he primarily played. Now that I think about it, I've watched him. But that's a guy you could use up front. He's 6'1", 256, not the biggest of guys, but still pretty solid. I mean, just kind of going through what I'm seeing here, there's I don't know. There's guys from like Virginia Tech. There's a lot of group of 5 guys, but I don't know, man. I feel like Mississippi State is past the point of we'll take anybody. I feel like they want to go after those guys, not just because they were at a big time program, but because they have a lot of potential and showed themselves out at their respective schools. There's like a guy from Purdue, Jamarian Harkless, LA Jesse Harrell from Florida State. I could keep going. I mean, but um, I don't know. There's going to be more guys entering the portal, I'm sure, this week and the weeks to come. And um, but I would agree with you though. We got to build the depth. We got to build the trenches. On the defensive side of the ball.
After O-line, what did you have as your next spot you wanted to you think State should prioritize in the portal?
After O-line, I would go basically the whole secondary. I mean, corners and safeties. I think we got to hit that too. I mean, it had good moments, had down moments this year for the secondary, but I feel like getting a key lockdown, especially I'm a guy that goes after like lockdown corners. If you could get a lockdown corner, dude, it would that would be something awesome. You got a couple key names out there at cornerback. Dakota Fields from Oregon, Elliott Washington had some good playing time at Penn State. Daniel Harris, each of those guys are 3 stars, by the way. He's from Georgia. I don't know about him, but I mean, there's trying to see if there's anyone I truly know. I mean, I knew the Penn State guy, Noah King from Colorado, Shelton Lewis from Clemson. There's a lot of corners out there on the Power 4 level already that, if given the chance at Mississippi State, I think could be, a a good impact player. I would, obviously more guys are going to enter, but I don't know. For state, man, they gotta prioritize the secondary positions.
Corner and safety both made my list. Whether Kelly Jones returns or not, and I know he had that Instagram post that suggested he's coming back, and it looks
Mhm.
like he's going through bowl practices. I hope he's back. It's just I'm going to hold off on saying for sure until we know for sure. Obviously, yeah, that gives you a great lockdown corner on one side.
Yeah.
Outside of Kelly Jones, State was not in a great place at cornerback this season, and I know Diego Brumfield had his moments where he played pretty well, but as the season went along, it just was a little bit more of a struggle. Um, Bringing up DJ Warner was a guy, I believe, a defensive lineman at SMU that underperformed. I don't know if I want a guy that underperformed, but I get needing to add guys in just from a depth standpoint. Which, by the way, Jaheim Otis, no, that's a no that people are talking about
Yeah.
already.
Nah.
He's in the portal again after Colorado. I do not care that he's from Mississippi. I don't care that State wanted him last time. No, if you can't crack the field at Colorado, you're not coming here and fixing Mississippi State's defensive line.
There's a good reason he left Alabama, by the way, too, is because he couldn't see the field. He goes to Colorado where they're desperate for guys like that, and if you can't even see the field there, I mean, shit, I don't know, man. But Jaheim Otis, he coming out of high school, I remember when Alabama was like trying to get him and recruit him. He looked like he was going to be a stud, but he never took off. You know,
Yeah, I don't want State to go that direction.
yeah,
But when it comes to the secondary, you have to find a guy who's a starting quality corner to go opposite of Kelly Jones. And of course, if Kelly Jones leaves, and you probably need to go out and get two. Um, so that's going to be a
hmm
priority. Safety, you're losing some of your top guys there. Um, like, well, that's the wrong team. But Brian Lanier, gone. Jerron Manning, gone. Hunter Washington, gone. Tony Mitchell, transferring out. So you outside of Isaac Smith, you don't really know of anybody for State at the safety position that you're confident is going to be a contributor. Now, you're bringing in Braylon Womack, who's a 5-star true freshman, and it's like, okay, great, awesome. I feel like that's a guy who could start right away at Mississippi State. You got to have other guys around him. Or what if he's not ready to step in and start? And you need somebody, or from positionally, you need someone else there. Safety position, State's going to have to go and get contributors. Um, I would just
I
look for
got a
guys.
guy.
Go ahead.
Who's in the portal at safety is that Boo Carter from Tennessee.
I'm good.
Yeah,
He's locker room cancer. Like that's
did
that's
not
that's a
know
thing.
that.
That's a thing with him, and apparently his family kind of get in the way of stuff. Not
Mm,
trying to just disparage the guy, but Tennessee fans are not upset to see him go. He is a talented player,
okay,
great kick returner, good nickel safety. All that's great. Boo Carter, at times, it's been a detriment to have him in the locker room. So I know that's a big name. I guess I wouldn't be shocked if Mississippi State kicked the tires just because of the talent, and maybe State's perspective is, hey, man, we're not worried about that stuff. We need a guy to come in and play.
yeah,
But uh, I don't know if that's a direction I would go. But again, like, very
okay.
talented. So we'll see. Um, but yeah, they got to find options for stepping in safety. You got to find a guy in the secondary. Uh, you talked about wide receiver. Thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I just think for Mississippi State's wide receiver core, I mean, you had some good guys this year. Um, and it struggled at times, but at the same time, it showed up. Maybe not as much as it needed to, but I thought it showed up at times. You had Evans, you had Brennan Thompson, of course. You had Jordan Mosley a little bit out there. I just, yeah, I feel like you need to attack the wide receiver position because I don't know if next year you will truly have that go to big time playmaker. I mean, assuming if guys come back, like you'll have Brendan Thompson, Anthony Evans, Jordan Mosley, but I mean, could you go into the portal to look to see if you get a guy that gives them a little bit more of a spark? Um, just in the passing game?
They're gonna need to add receivers. Um, they've got to get receivers. So Brennan Thompson, obviously, don't know this. Whether or not he's going to be able to get another year of eligibility. That's not a case of applying for a waiver, as it is. There's a whole big thing over whether or not players are going to be given a fifth year to play.
Mm-hmm.
That's like going through the courts right now. Our guy's going to just be granted 5 years of eligibility to play. I think the schools are trying to. Strike it down. There was literally in court today, and there was no decision made. The schools obviously want to strike it down because ultimately, it's a problem for roster when you got keeping guys on the roster like that. But either way, so you can't cycle through. If you get it passed, that's another year for him. That's great, fantastic, because he was such a good player for state this year. If not, that's obviously a big loss. So you got to replace. We don't know the situation fully with Anthony Evans yet, so it's already out there that Evans may start exploring options. He's not in the portal. He's not made a decision to hit the portal. Obviously, nobody's in the portal because it doesn't open yet, but he has not announced his intentions to transfer. That it's not known for sure that's a thing, but it is known other schools are talking to him, and it is known that right now he is and his people are sort of considering options. So there's no guarantee you're going to get Anthony Evans back. Obviously, you want to. That's a guy who had a big season for you. And if you can bring an established starter receiver back who was a go-to guy for you this season, led your team in receptions, great. You want to have him back. It'd be great to see what he could do in another year within this offense. But if you lose him, obviously that's another guy that you're talking about having to replace. And then you look at what you have coming back. Aiden Williams got better as the season went along, but man, Aiden Williams is going to have to show a lot more to feel like the guy that I think people were hoping for. Jordan Mosley's moving on. San Francisco McGee caught 3 passes for you. Ricky Johnson caught 3 passes for you. Marcus Allen is gone. Grayson Harris caught 1 pass for you. So outside of Thompson and Evans, you are bringing back, 3, 6, 7. You're bringing back 26 catches at receiver next year outside of Thompson and Evans, who, again, we don't know whether or not they're returning for sure. I don't think you're going to get Thompson back, but again, if something gets ruled that you could get him back, that'd be great. And then we'll see what happens with Evans. You got to go out and land some guys. And I know there's some young guys on the roster you hope it could contribute. I know there's freshmen coming in. This freshman class looks really good. I think it's a good group of freshman receivers, and there's a couple guys who will get on the field. State's got to find a proven target. Look, I think there's no shortage of shifty slot receivers to find. If you lose Anthony Evans, I'm not worried about being able to replace him. And that's not a shot at Anthony Evans. It's just the reality is there's never a shortage of receivers in the portal. And when it comes to the slot position, and I think I overplayed this some last year over you got to have somebody who's used to running routes over the middle, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, there's truth to that. But the reality is any decently athletic player at receiver, if you put him in the slot and you have a good play caller, you're probably going to be able to scheme up touches for him. That's just kind of how that goes. It's easy to scheme up touches for the slot. The key is, can you have a guy that's a real threat on the outside? Mississippi State had that this season with Brennan Thompson. And I would love if you could get, big body, fast receiver to put on the outside. I feel like you need to go and find that. And I think there's guys who will hit the portal that'll be good options. But a true deep threat receiver on the outside is something that I think would be big. Whether Brennan Thompson comes back or not. If you're able to get him another year, I still say go out and find a guy like that. And if you don't get him back, then I think you need to find multiple. It's a ton of value when you have those guys on the outside that can really make a big impact for sure. So really, we're kind of in consensus. Offensive line, defensive line, cornerback, safety, receiver. Those are the spots you're looking at State needing to hit the heaviest. Any closing thoughts, any other position? I know we brought up quarterback, but I think I expect to have a transfer quarterback I'll put it this way. If Luke Kromenhoek hits the portal, Mississippi State will have a transfer quarterback. If Luke Kromenhoek stays on the roster, State's not going to add another quarterback. But that's not a position. State's not in the sweepstakes for any big-name QBs. If they go and get a portal guy, it's a guy that knows he is coming in to be a backup. You're probably just looking for a veteran depth option over anything else, because you know who your starter is next year. So I'm glad State's not having to play that game, because they were kind of in the game last year with the whole Jackson Arnold thing of, will they, won't they with Arnold. This year they're not playing that game at all, which I'm grateful for. You can put your resources towards offensive and defensive line, but any other spot you'd look at that you think State needs to find a guy?
Not that I can think of. I mean, we pretty much hit the nail on the head with, receiver and maybe a quarterback. But I mean, like, you think about it, man, like, we're good on the run game. We got Fluff, we got Johnny Daniels, Devon Booth. As far as we're concerned, those guys
Two of those
should
guys
be
are
here next year, right?
Booth is graduated NFL, and then Daniels.
Okay.
Daniels redshirted this year, and you can read between the lines that he's probably not – it's not official, but I would be surprised if Johnny Daniels at Mississippi State next year. But Fluff Bothwell coming back. Apparently Xavier Gaden just announced that he'll be returning. You're bringing in a pair of freshmen that are very talented pieces. Had signed, I think it's Colin Wilson is his name. So, I mean, Seth Davis still on the roster. If he becomes fully healthy, that'd be a ton of fun to see what he could do. They're going to be fine at running back. I guess if there's a can't-miss guy who wants to come for cheap, so a name that hit the portal, KD Daniels, is transferring out of Florida. West Point product. So, 20 minutes outside of Starkville, was a 4-star signee. Some people are already asking, should Mississippi State make a move? If you want to come for cheap, cool. Otherwise, I know it'd be a homecoming and there's people who would love to see it. I don't need State spending money on running back in this portal class.
Yeah, I want to go wasting my time on it too much. I mean, look, I wouldn't pursue it, basically, if I'm Mississippi State. But again, you don't want to turn down the chance if someone chooses to come over here. I just want to go trying to influence anybody, I get what you're saying there.
Yeah, they're going to look, the resources are going to offensive and defensive line over everything else. And then I think anywhere else you can find upgrade, you'll try to, but I think
we're good. Not that we ever really talk about it, but I'm sure we're good at kicker and punter, right? Special teams we're covered and all that.
Should be. Kyle Ferry has at least another year. Ethan Pulliam is young at punter. You got your guys there.
Yeah. Cool.
So yeah, look, State, you're going to load up in the trenches. If you can find a couple impact receivers, and I think you need to find a couple impact receivers. Tight end is an underrated one. I didn't talk about tight end. Because that room, it's turning over quite a bit. Sadu obviously is out of eligibility. And he had a solid year for you this season. Caught 34 passes, 358 yards, 5 touchdowns. You'll have Sam West back, caught 1 touchdown, saw a good bit of playing time, but was not a huge factor in things. As I mentioned, Max Reese is moving on, so that's a guy that you brought in as a depth piece. You do have Cam Ball, who caught a couple passes, but I don't think anybody's expecting him to really be a contributor at tight end. He's mostly there as a blocker. Have some younger guys on the roster maybe. You're bringing in a exciting tight end class, a couple quality signees, and then obviously Zayon Cotton, who's sort of a wide receiver tight end hybrid guy, which frankly that's what Sadu is. We'll see what direction they go there and how much of a role he could play as a freshman. I'd be interested, though, to see, do they go after tight ends? And what type of tight end do they go after? Because it's an interesting debate. Because I feel tight end blocking has not been good enough for Mississippi State. So if you're going to go after a tight end, you kind of feel like you need somebody who can get in there and be physical. But, and this gets into a whole spread offense theory, there's a guy that I reference quite a bit, and I really love his work, Ian Boyd, who he covers Texas for the On3 site, so Inside Texas, but he has a Substack called America's War Game, where he breaks down football scheme stuff and is a really great guy to follow on social media when it comes to understanding scheme. He's the guy who came up with the name veer and shoot. He named the veer and shoot offense, which the guys who run the veer and shoot offense do not call it that, but that's the name that he gave to it. So he's a great follow when it comes to understanding the offense that Jeff Lebby runs, that Mississippi State is running. And one of the things he talks about is that if you have a dual threat quarterback, in which case Mississippi State will, you are actually better off having a pass catching tight end as opposed to a blocking tight end. I think a lot of people would assume if you have a dual threat quarterback, well, you're going to be running the football. You want a blocker at tight end. It just seems like it makes a lot of sense. And if you have a quarterback who throws it a lot, you want a tight end who's a receiver. But the point he makes is that when it comes to actually equating numbers in the run game within a spread system, if you have a quarterback who can run, a quarterback is a part of the equation where it impacts the numbers and impacts the blocking. So if your tight end needs to be a player who works off of that. If you have a quarterback who can run, your tight end blocking is not as important. So if you're going to have another guy on the field, you want it to be a guy who can impact you from a receiving standpoint, who can impact the game in that way. If your quarterback can't run, now it makes it tougher to run the football, so we need a tight end who can block really well. So you get, instead of getting a guy who's a great pass catcher, we need a guy who can step in and help us block. It's getting into numbers, it's getting into spread offense. It's kind of a cool idea, and I think it applies. And you actually look at a lot of the tight ends who put up big receiving numbers are guys that played with dual threat quarterbacks. So for one, I do say this to say, man, Kamario Taylor and Seydou Traore could have been cooking this year if you had them on the field at the same time. But two, I'm interested to see what route Jeff Lebby chooses to go. Like, does he apply that theory to Mississippi State and go out and try to get another pass catcher? Does he feel that Zayon Cotton as a freshman can do enough of a job to step in and play that type of role? We'll see. I know we didn't spend a ton of time talking tight end, I guess, until there. And I went on my whole little scheme spiel. But that's another position I'll be interested to see what State does in the portal if they take a good look at tight ends and what type of tight ends they go after.
We found at least though. So I'm looking at 3 tight ends, and I don't have a whole lot of like film or anything, but I mean, you got a guy in Michael Smith from South Carolina. You got Pierce Sperlin from Georgia. But one guy that actually stands out to me was a 4-star as a recruit. Ended up going to Tulsa. He's 6'6", 260. Have you heard of this guy, Brody Foley? And I was actually watching some of his film just now. This guy's really fast, and he can block. Great pass catcher. Just so much. Apparently, he grew up playing football, and he actually played a little bit of linebacker and running back. Then he got a little tall, and they said, he should go for tight end or receiver. So he ended up tight end. But I mean, you go to Tulsa and get a guy like that. Again, he's 6'6", 260, man. I mean, that's pretty good size, I would think.
I'm curious about. He's considered a 4-star transfer. How was he
at Tulsa?
Oh, wait a minute. Okay, hold on. Let me look. I think that he started his career. Okay, he started his career at Indiana.
Oh, did he? I missed that part. Oh, he signed with Indiana in 2021. Okay. And then he hit the portal and went to Tulsa for whatever reason.
Yes.
And he had visits and offers. He was a Tennessee commit too, and he took some visits to like Auburn, Wisconsin, Michigan State, teams like that.
Now, I mean, we're just talking about this random tight end. I'm curious what his production looked like this year. I'm going to pull that up now. He was their leading receiver with 37 catches for 528 yards, 7 touchdowns. All right. He had 2 rushing touchdowns as well.
Yeah.
So, okay, if Jeff Lebby would like to go out and get Brody Foley at tight end, I will take that for sure. That'd be a fun addition to have to the offense. Give you another weapon in there. All right. So again, just running through it, we know Mississippi State offensive and defensive line are going to be the biggest priorities. They need corners. They need safeties. Probably need some pass catchers. If you hit those spots, and I guess from a specialty standpoint, you need at least a couple guys that you feel good about pass rusher, whether it's an outside linebacker, whether it's a defensive end. You got to get guys who can get after the quarterback. But, of course, that kind of applies within defensive line edge rusher. They got a lot of spots they're going to have to hit. They're losing a lot of pieces off this roster. There's reason to believe that there's still some talented pieces coming back and that you're going to have a good core, but they're going to need to do a lot in the portal. So, obviously, that's going to be a big part of the attention here in the coming weeks, in the next couple of months, because Mississippi State's really got to overhaul this roster. We will be back Thursday. We'll talk more on the coaching news, see if anything is resolved at wide receivers coach, if we have an answer as to who State's going to bring in at that spot. Also, if there's any clarity for other positions on the coaching staff, whether or not that stuff gets settled. Any more portal news, we're certainly going to get into it. And then we'll find more things to talk about. Shout out to Mississippi State men's basketball getting the big comeback win against Utah. God, I wish if they had a couple more wins, if they had just beaten SMU, which they were in control of that game and just let it slip away in the second half, and then between New Mexico and San Francisco, just split those games, they'd still be behind the 8 ball. We'd still be talking about it's going to be an uphill battle in conference play, but you could still feel like, hey, if they play well in the SEC, they could get to the tournament. But I think they've just put themselves a little bit too far behind, unless just barring a miracle. Like Texas A&M a couple years ago lost 5 non-con games, and they had some bad losses with no good wins. But then they went 15-3 in the SEC, and they ended up getting a 7 seed in the tournament. That's kind of Mississippi State's hope, is you gotta put together a season like that, or not quite that good, but close to it if you're talking about getting into the tournament. But we'll see if the football team can build some momentum. But it was a good win. It was good to see them get a win. In the words of Kevin Malone, it's just nice to win one. That'll do it for us tonight. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. If you haven't already, please leave us a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel. Turn that notification bell on so you do know when we do go live. And as always, swing your sword and Hail State.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.